All right, hello. I hope you're doing well, but today's video is on Chapter 12. Chapter 12 is the modern search, and we'll bring our textbook to a conclusion. And so just as we started it as an interesting trip to look at all these faiths around the world, we're finally coming back to our destination and winding it down. So our author there, the first thing he mentions is usually a trip to another city, and this chapter is no exception, but he has come to Venice. And the city of Venice maybe doesn't have some of the historical pains that some of the other cities that he has visited. And then maybe there's more joy here and optimism about the future than maybe some of his prior destinations. But he had planned to see many sights and did do that in the city, and of course it seems like he had a good time and was able to accomplish what he wanted to do, and then had some interesting interactions with others. He seems to be a very sociable type person. That's great. But he describes a trip to St. Mark's Basilica and just a really beautiful sight there and the interesting service that accompanied it as well. Now, our book just mentions here as we start the first slide, the modern influences on the future of religion. So there's lots of things that we want to consider, and we'll start with the first one about the New World Order. So really, our author there is saying, well, in the past, people lived in rural areas and they didn't have a lot of contact with others. But now the majority of people live in cities, and the system of government in which a monarch is ruling, that's less common than what it was in the past. There's been many world changes that have taken place, and like the Berlin Wall coming down and communism ending in the Soviet Union and many other things too, but those are just a couple examples that show you, for example, how changes in the world, have really led to a new order. Because of the inventions for travel and making it easier and less time consuming, and then, for example, how culture can be spread through television and just ways of programming that people can see is really also helped in terms of the differences we see in the world today as compared to in the past. And then globalism, that's made the world a smaller place, and it may make it more difficult for individual religions to remain separate because of this constant contact of one culture with another. And certainly capitalism is the system in which people can make profit and all that. That will certainly have an impact on religion. And we'll just have to see what happens into the future. Now, in the past, just to show you how capitalism may change things, but people thought in the past that being poor was a sign of blessedness in some religions, but that's really not the case today. We had mentioned in other chapters about the prosperity gospel, but money certainly has caused people to live different lives and make a lot of things easier. But certainly materialism and that idea and capitalism will change religions and cause people to maybe ask some questions about, how much religions contribute to human betterment, maybe versus some of these other ideas like capitalism. All right, the next influence we want to mention today is multiculturalism, and maybe also attached with that the interfaith dialogue. But there's lots of cross-cultural contact. Again, we mentioned in the first one with travel, but it just makes this easier and almost unavoidable. So it's good for religions to be more aware of the teachings and practices of others. And there's just many examples of the blending of faiths that we've seen throughout our textbook. So, Pure Land Buddhism, for example, in Japan and outside of Japan, in their faith, they have adopted the use of what in Christian practice of Sunday school. So that's, just one example out of many that we could show where it's just almost unavoidable that these cross-cultural contacts don't have impact upon these faiths. Now, meetings of religious groups who want to find common ground and maybe work out some of their differences, that was really something that didn't happen all that much in the past. But now it does. And our book references the First World Parliament of Religions meeting that was held in Chicago back in 1893. And then 100 years later, there was a second one. But at one of the meetings, that first one at least, it was said there that, all religions are similar and that they value holiness and love. So, trying to find common ground, is this the path for the future where you find them more working together, or maybe like in the past where this just didn't really happen and they went their own, so to speak, separate ways for the most part. Another influence on the future of religion is women's right movement. And so there's a history in the past of many of the faiths that we've looked at where women were excluded and could not do a lot of the things that now today they are starting to be involved in. So you can look through history and see, for example, that there's been an attempt to liberate women from oppression and inequality, that there's a lot of traditions that have restricted women in many ways, whether it was acquiring an education or owning land or having a professional career, traveling, marrying whomever they wished, voting and holding office, just lots of areas there. Now, there's been movements of all kinds, and some of them are educational and political, that have helped remedy some of these situations. There's also scientific advances that have produced contraceptives, and that would minimize the complications of pregnancy, and again allowing women to contribute in these areas that have traditionally, at least some of them, been off limits. There's changing attitudes towards women roles and rights, and certainly we understand that today in our time very well today. So all of this has led to changes in power. That's led to closer equality in government, in business, and the arts. There's been several religious movements such as Shinto, Christian Science, the Foursquare Gospel Church, that were all founded by women. And there are certainly many Christian churches, the Episcopal, the Anglican, and Lutheran tradition all allow women to be ordained as priests or bishops. And in other faiths, such as Judaism, women have also been ordained in the Reform and Conservative branches at least, but not so far in Orthodox Judaism. Buddhism, for example, has seen some changes with nuns that typically in the past only had a small role in leadership, but that is changing too. Now, in the sacred writings themselves, you are seeing a change in that they're using pronouns that attempt to be more neutral. So, for example, words such as ruler, creator, and parent, they are used in place of typically masculine words that would be Lord and Father. And some of these have been, ongoing for a long time. So the founder of Christian Science, Mary Baker Eddy, for example, was using terms like this way back in 1875. So there are many religions also that emphasize the divine as being female or the feminine aspect as being highly valued. So when we look at some of our indigenous religions and those that really stress nature, you can find such things as this. So Wicca or some of the deities themselves are where they're more female-oriented. You can look at other religions such as Hinduism, Shinto, the shamanistic religions, Taoism. Again, they all have some aspects of female roles or important contributions from women themselves. But that's, again, an area for the future. What does the future hold? Is it going to be more male domination or female liberation? The last item on this first slide, when we look at modern influences on the future of religion, is the reassessment of human sexuality. And so there's been many different academic disciplines that have helped to contribute some different maybe perspectives in which sexuality includes more than procreation as its purpose. So again, it seems that our understanding of sexuality as a group has seemed to have broadened over, again, a pretty good amount of time here. So some would even go further and say, well, what is really the purpose of marriage? So that's the kind of thinking that maybe goes into this influence about religion. Religion has more of a traditional viewpoint that marriage between a man and a woman was simply more based about procreation than anything else, and that's really maybe what's being questioned today. So what constitutes intimacy, what constitutes pleasure, self-expression, and self-understanding may be some things that are more thought about today than maybe in the past. Traditional ethics, what was sexually prohibited and what was allowed, is maybe being rethought according to some of these religious traditions, and maybe what you could maybe argue is going to come about from all of this is greater tolerance, maybe the path that seems to be forming now. So many religions in the past, again, would look at more heterosexual contact, but now even same-gender sexual expression in relationships would be in some of the religious faiths, maybe some that we've covered and some that are outside the ones we've covered in our textbook, would be some that are rethinking that as well. Some of those groups would be the Jewish, the Unitarians, the Quakers, the Unity Church, the Episcopalians, and Lutherans. So that certainly shows a change in some of those areas. But overall, what you can say is I think that the sexual revolution, and maybe that goes back again 50 years and maybe even more, but that's had quite an impact on religion, and so people are changing the way that they think about these things. Okay, so this next slide really continues the same type theme, looking at some more influences on the future of religion. And so modern science has really impacted the world in quite a dramatic way. So in the 16th and 17th centuries, with a lot of the contributions by scientists like Isaac Newton and Galileo and Kepler and others, but their discoveries helped to set the stage for later discoveries in the 18th and 19th centuries, such as machinery and light, electricity, and figuring out lightning and how they related together, engines powered by steam and coal, and then medical advances that helped to prevent a lot of disease and suffering. The telephone came around, and then transportation advances such as the airplane, radio, TV, and computers. From there, you can even talk about scientific theories that have had an impact. So whether it's molecular theory or the theory of relativity, theories of astronomy and quantum physics, or evolution itself, these helped change thinking and eventually the way our world, we view it and actually live in it. Now, some people would say that, hey, that even though you have all these discoveries in science, but the negative would be that they are basically in opposition towards religion and God. So that's always a consideration too. But just how much of these contributions are beneficial and how many of them are not. Does it help to strengthen religious belief, or does it weaken religious belief? Does it help morality, or does it hurt morality? So those would maybe be some other considerations when it comes to science and technology, and then, of course, its influence upon religion. All right, so the next one there is with science and ethical issues. So we've already noted that science and technology have broadened our knowledge. It's enriched our lives and helped us certainly live longer, and almost doubling of the lifespan. So now people, in effect, are going to have new choices, but these new choices where you can apply your freedom can lead to some ethical dilemmas. Which way should you go? So several of those ethical issues might be fertility assistance. So, for example, now you can help people who have had trouble in having children or conceiving children. So in vitro fertilization or fertility drugs, those are some, but the ethical question comes in, is the survival of a few babies worth the potential loss of others who might die as a result of this. Birth control. So, we typically think of these advances for women and how they could help women minimize some of the unpleasant characteristics of pregnancy. But what about a contraceptive pill for men? So that's something in the future, if not already, that will happen there to where, again, people have more control over when to have children and not, versus some of the unsatisfactory methods of the past. Ending of pregnancy. So, is there an ethical termination of pregnancy? So at what point does a developing child, an embryo or fetus, is it considered a human being and have human rights? Is there any moral difference between an early abortion and a late-term abortion? So that technology is out there today. And again, just some of the questions that might come along with how you put it into practice. Another one of these ethical issues with science is when should you be able to terminate adult life? So do you have an individual right to end your own life or not? Or could you end the life of a family member, a spouse, a relative, a friend, a parent, or a child, or some other there when they are in a medical condition in which they are suffering or just terminally ill? There's not going to be a recovery. Organ transplantation. So with failing body organs and parts, they can sometimes be replaced by another human being, but now with technology, some of these can be grown in animals or manufactured. So, common organs that are replaced are hearts, kidneys, livers, corneas. So, again, does this mean in the future you will have to donate? Are you obliged to donate your body parts after your demise? Or, is it ethical for people to sell parts of their bodies before or after death? Maybe a few more here issues, and then we'll move on to another topic of modern influences on the future of religion include genetic manipulation and stem cell research. So, what kinds of experiments in this area are ethically acceptable, and on whom should they be allowed to be performed? So, if from research on the genetic code you could learn how to have a offspring with heightened intelligence or extended lifespans, new treatments for disease, all of these might be areas in which this genetic manipulation and stem cell research might be applied. And then finally, the species right, but are there basic rights that human beings have? So if there is, does this mean it applies in some parts to animals? And if it applies to animals, does it apply to insects? Does it apply to trees? Or just who or what do these rights actually apply to? So in our generation, these are all issues that will have to be thought about, and maybe a policy, of how you're going to handle it. Now, in the past, the founders of the world religions, they did not have to address these issues. They didn't come up. So it's quite a different era in which we live. But yet, we recognize how valuable science can be to help make the earth a more pleasant place to live and to inhabit than it was in the past. But yet, that comes with some decisions that can be tricky there that we have to consider. All right, our next topic on the slide is secularism. And so secular is a word that's really used to denote the opposite of the sacred. So it uses modern concerns and separates religion from everyday life. All right, so the idea of separating religion from public life really, I think, got its start somewhere in Europe, but it was really after some wars of the 16th and 17th century and the horrors and death that were inflicted in those wars, but it caused some to think of a future in which there would be no state religion. So, people should be free to practice the religion as they chose, and we're very well familiar with that here in the United States because it's in our Constitution and the First Amendment. And then, other nations such as France and Australia and New Zealand have really also picked up on this idea that you should be free to worship whatever religion you want to do. Now that also means practicing no religion if you want to do that, but it seems overall with the trend that secularism seems to be gaining ground. Maybe you could also argue that some of the traditional religions and their worldviews have lessened in their influence over time, and so just what does the future hold? More secularism, or is it going to be a religious revival? But we just don't know. Now, if religions are going to survive, they're going to have to give greater meaning and add to the secular modern world. So it's almost kind of like they've got to find something useful or else they will fade away. Now, maybe one area in which religion can continue to add and grow and still be relevant is it deals with things beyond the physical. Now, with the secular, it really deals with the physical. But, realistically, whether you're talking about physical or the spiritual, some of the same qualities are involved in each, whether it's observation, experimentation, and verification. Now, agnostics are people who say that they do not think there's enough proof or to disprove that God exists. But agnosticism is sometimes associated with a secular worldview. So biologist T.H. Huxley is the one who came up with the term agnosticism, and he believed that the existence of God could neither be proven nor disproven from a scientific point of view. So that is a common view today, but it accommodates the study and teaching of science without really reference to any type of God or gods. All right, and a lot of people, that's just simply appealing to them. They want to carry on their everyday life and without any reference, again, to the supernatural side. All right, so maybe our future will do that. Maybe a type of secular belief system that really does that type of thing already is communism. So in Russia and Eastern Europe, there's been generations of people that have been raised without religion through their belief of communism. All right, so in China, for example, now they had a religious background, but when the Chinese Communist Revolution of 1949 took over, some of the illustrations they used is that religion was just outmoded for a new modern society, and it really wouldn't help them, so they kind of moved away. Secular governments would argue that in the past, many hospitals, schools, and welfare programs were really once exclusively under the control of religion, but now that has really moved more to the issue of the state and secular government. So as you can tell, there's just lots of questions about the future of these two, secularism and, of course, religion. All right, the last item here on our slide deals with the environmental challenges. And so 500 years ago, or around 500 years ago, the world's population was about 500 million. And now today, in 2020, it's getting close to about 8 billion. So, there are cities now that are called megacities that have populations over 1 million. And I'm sure there's quite a few that you could say are 10 million. But the point of all that is that the natural environment is really having trouble providing enough resources for that amount of people. So rainforests are disappearing, animal habitats are being threatened, and then power sources, say such as nuclear energy, that's used to make electricity. But where do you safely store the fuel rods of spent fuel to make this electricity? What about the herbicides and pesticides that are used on crops that eventually people could consume? Does it cause any problems or not? So maybe those are at least a couple of the environmental challenges that we can think of. Now our book also has a little bit of section there, a section that deals a little bit with these religious faiths are usually against violence, but yet violence does come up from time to time, and so a lot of the religions had a principle that they would not engage in violence, but yet Some here in America, we have the battle hymn of the Republic, and there's a verse there about the Lord who holds a terrible swift sword. So, again, maybe some of these instances in which there is some violence. So, even Muhammad thought there were some times when violence was justified. Even the Sikhs, for example, they didn't like violence, but as a result of some things that had happened to them, decided to be prepared and in case that they were attacked, they could defend themselves. All right, as we move on here, we further on the environmentalism issue and want to see some of the parallels that it has with traditional religion. So, first off, we'll start with a sensitivity to nature, and what our author would like to tell us is this didn't just start with the modern green movement, but it's been in a lot of religions for a long period of time. There's many, for example, religions that have made environmentalism an important ethical commandment. So whether it's Taoism or any other religion that we care to look at, it would argue that, hey, nature is an important part of our religious belief, and we ought to take care of it and sustain it, again, with all the increased demands because of the world population today that we have. Now, these commandments that we see in dietary laws and sacred places, that's very parallel to what we see with the religions, but it's going to help to dictate what a person should or should not eat, what they should or should not wear, and what they should or should not do. So some of these would also, these commands and traditions that are going to be found in environmentalism are going to be mystical, but maybe some areas in which it does not line up to the religion is the lack of these sacramental ritualistic elements that characterize religion. So now faiths like Wicca, they're going to recreate some of these pre-Christian nature rituals that are important to them, or the Druidism or some other religions that we've looked at here in the book. It is through the work of some people who were environmentalists in nature, whether they were painters or other careers, but some of their paintings themselves were so peaceful and got a lot of attention to themselves that these paintings helped to make some of the national parks actually come about in the United States. So, for example, Claude Monet is a good example. A lot of his paintings, he was an impressionist, but he helped to make Yosemite National Park a reality in the United States. And so there are other places that you may want to think of as sacred to environmentalists. Yosemite National Park, the Rocky Mountains, and several wildlife preserves are all just maybe to get us going. Now, some of the scripture, so to speak, that environmentalists would use would be poems or literature or songs that are written by various different people, again, like Henry David Thoreau or others that are out there, but it's simply to grow or make aware the environmentalist ideas and how you could help and further this yourself. All right. So mentioned there some of the sites and the parks, and then the scriptures, and then the festivals. Good example of that would be maybe Earth Day, observed on April 22nd. That's been around for a good number of decades, but recently it has expanded beyond just that one day, and some would even say it's a week-long or month-long observance now. So always kind of spreading. You can see new forms of tourism in which people get to see places like the Amazon, the Great Barrier Reef, or other places that, again, kind of get them hooked in their interest in these ideas. Getting zoos to be redesigned to have more of a natural appearance for animals, more spacious rather than a jail. It needs to be more comfortable and familiar to the animals that are habitating in these areas. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. So the elements of modern eclectic spirituality. So eclectic spirituality is when people say they're really not interested so much in a religion itself, but they are interested in spirituality. So it's basically a difference there in whether one is religious or spiritual. And then what they do is that it's kind of like what I call the cafeteria approach, but they'll pick the things that are important to them that they really like, and then that's what they say promotes inner peace and a feeling of harmony between themselves and the world. So again, this is trying to get at a good description of what we mean by eclectic spirituality. So a lot of people who say this is for me will say their beliefs can be expressed basically as an attitude of respect and reverence for all people and all creatures. And it's a blending or syncretic type thing where they borrow, again, what they feel is right from them from one or more religions, and then they come up with this kind of bundle of things that are very important. So again, we see lots of this. This is not anything unusual to see, but there are a lot of people who maybe take this to where they worship more by themselves or feel good by themselves. So maybe they don't go to a church, a temple, a mosque, or a synagogue, but instead maybe their backyard or a park, and they have their own altar there, or meditation area, or garden room for reflection, or an indoor, outdoor, water type, fall type thing that makes them feel really good. Their home now becomes this sacred space. Alright, so again, that's more of the contemplative practices that we see in that eclectic spirituality today. A lot of people like gardening or bike riding or meditation and feel that does it for them rather than the formal religious worship that most of our religions have talked about. Now, religion is such an important idea that we see these themes everywhere in popular culture. So films, comic strips, we again have a section here in our book that talks a little bit about that. But they often have religious themes if you look very carefully. So if you don't look carefully, you may miss them. But they have a depth that kind of you wouldn't expect in maybe a comic strip in the paper or something kind of like that. Our author mentions that Pablo Picasso really enjoyed comics for this very reason, that they were very efficient in kind of how they used space, and so from that alone they needed kind of careful consideration, and we should try to pull out what we could from them in that way. Now it is interesting, if you want to get a little bit deeper, but everybody's basically, I think, heard of Superman, but one of the first comic book characters out there, but there are a lot of interesting parallels with Superman and religion. So our book mentions several of those, but his goal is to bring forth justice and truth. He desires justice and compassion. His name is Kal-El. His father's name is Jor-El, and we have seen that El means God itself, and he's the last son of Krypton, and he comes to Earth again to do all these good things and help people. So it's kind of easy to see maybe some of the parallels to religion from that. Whether they meant that or not, I'm not sure. And then now maybe one that you haven't considered or thought about, maybe have. If you're an Elvis fan, then maybe you have. But Presleyanity is the cult of Elvis. But here are some of the religious parallels from that, if you see them this way. But he died very early in life. He later appears to the faithful. He supposedly, if his old photos, have healing power. He's dressed in white on some occasions. His birth and death are remembered. If you go to see Graceland, maybe you can consider that a pilgrimage, or other places that he lived and worked. And then his particular style of music, some have called that his gospel music. And then, if it's not Elvis, then maybe it could be some of these other entertainers that we have seen. Jim Morrison, John Lennon, Bob Marley, Kurt Cobain, and the Grateful Dead. So, overall, I think one of the big themes out there for for a lot of movies is good versus evil. Now, one other thing I want to mention, and let me see if I may have missed this, but there we go. So one of the slides in our material mentions more with the eclectic spirituality, but the interrelatedness, want to pick up just a little bit on that. But many religions have emphasized some sort of relatedness among all beings, and that may remind you of Buddhism and Hinduism, but it's just kind of looking for this link between the world of religion and science, especially from some of the other comments that we've made. But our book just lists a number of artists who have tried to do that, whether in painting or photography or some other of the arts, but would try to do this, and they have been recognized as doing a good job in this regard of trying to find that connection between religion and the modern world or science, and especially in terms of this eclectic spirituality if you don't go to one of the big religions that are out there. The reverence and respect is also not only something for nature but a part of ourselves, at least according to our author, that must be natured for its own sake. So maybe again the best way that this happens is through photography. And again, it's in just different aspects of life. So some of the artists that are listed in our book, they would explore life from a particular point of view and capture it in photography that many people have found meaningful and hit upon some of the values that they thought were very critical to them, almost at a religious nature. So whether it was photographs of the Civil War and life then, or indigenous life of Native Americans who were vanishing and disappearing, their numbers were dying off, or either people living during the Great Depression. So these were, again, a couple examples that are mentioned in our textbook that follow along these lines. But, again, this reverence and respect just is the spirit that permeates reality and recognizes that it's a phenomenon to be revered. So maybe that helps a little bit more. And then the last one here of the elements of modern eclectic spirituality is the contemplative practices. And it just really is saying that, well, hey, that eclectic spirituality says that there's a relatedness again with all creation, but not everybody kind of sees it that way. They may not pick up on it. So some people, they can pick up on it using mysticism, meditation, dancing or tea ceremonies, or some form of yoga relative to maybe a trance state. But again, there's just different ways to do it. We've seen this in some of the forms of Buddhism that are out there. We've seen it in Christianity with chants, and then Shinto and some of their chants and their music choices. But in itself, music may be one of these things that helps people experience some type of mental connectedness with the sacred, and that's really the objective of what's going on. So I hope this has helped at least with some of the material to break the chapter down and help you with your reading. We do have a pretty lengthy book and not very many weeks to get it read in. So please take advantage of all the resources in Blackboard, such as the notes and the chapter outline and the some of the chapter review tests to help you prep before the quiz and the exam, and then the Quizlet, which may be useful to you in learning some of the vocabulary. But if I can help you further, just please contact me, and I'll be glad to do so. So I hope you're doing well, and I will see you the next time.